Namaste. Aloha. Welcome. My name is Janapati Das, and this is the Bhagavad Gita as it is class. We are continuing reading through chapter 3 entitled Karma Yoga. So please accept my respects, everyone. I'd like to take this opportunity to offer my respectful obeisances to my spiritual master, Jagat Guru Siddhaswarapananda Paramahamsa Srila Prabhupada, and to His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, my spiritual grandfather, who purported and translated this Bhagavad Gita that we've been reading through. So we are going to start with some hearing and chanting of Krishna's names, Kirtan. So please join along. It's lots of fun. Namo Siddha Swarupananda Paramamsa Namine Gola Karuna Svarupaya Radha Krishna Pristayate Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. I was born in the darkness of ignorance, and my spiritual master opened my eyes with the torch of knowledge. I offer my respectful obeisances unto him. Okay, so we are reading towards the end of chapter 3, starting. We had been reading, of course, the wonderful verses before that Arjuna was asking about how people are impelled to sinful activities, even if by force. And the Blessed Lord said it was lust only, which is born of contact of material modes of passion and later transformed into wrath, which is the all-devouring sinful enemy of the world. So this is a perfect example of what we see in this world, the way that people act. They're contemplating the objects of the senses and becoming attached to those results or potential results and not being frustrated by that. And we talked about the different degrees of lust that covers the consciousness, like dust on a mirror, and fire over smoke, and the womb, embryo covered by the womb. So we're reading from text 39 as our Krishna delineates more about this lust. Sanskrit, text 39. Avrityam jnanam etena gananino nicha vairina kama rupena kanteya dushpure nanalena cha. Avritam, covered, ganam, pure consciousness. Etena, by this, ganinaha, of the knower. Nicha varina, eternal enemy. Kama rupena, in the form of lust. Kantena, O son of Kunti. Dushpurena, never to be satisfied. Analena, by the fire. Cha, also. Translation: thus a man's pure consciousness is covered by his eternal enemy in the form of lust, which is never satisfied and which burns like fire. So, very descriptive. This lust burns, the desires to own and control things, whether it be in a woman or a job or a different position, a power. It just burns. It burns, and it is never satisfied, because the pure consciousness is covered by this. It's not that the lust has something to do with the living entity and in its pure loving relationship with Krishna, but when it's covering him, there is confusion, there's bewilderment. Purport: it is said in the Manu Smriti that lust cannot be satisfied by any amount of sense enjoyment, just as fire is never extinguished by a constant supply of fuel. In the material world, the center of all activities is sex, and thus this material world is called Maithunya Agara, or the shackles of sex life. That's a great analogy. I mean, people are so driven, and men are driven by the sex desire, and women know this oftentimes, that men are, and they know that they can in turn get things from men, money, power, positions in society, by using their sex, by shaking, so it goes both ways, and men just are like dogs. They can't control themselves when they see a beautiful woman. Sometimes it's the opposite way too. Of course, in the ordinary prison house, criminals are kept within bars. Similarly, criminals who are disobedient to the laws of the Lord are shackled by sex life. Advancement of material civilization on the basis of sense gratification means increasing the duration of the material existence of a living entity. Therefore, this lust is the symbol of ignorance by which the living entity is kept within the material world. while one enjoys sense gratification, it may be that there is some feeling of happiness, but in actuality, the so-called feeling of happiness is the ultimate enemy of the sense enjoyer. So this is referenced many places, Pinocchio, in this carnival, and there is a part in that old literature called The Pilgrim's Way by John Bunyan, where the pilgrim of God, he's on a spiritual quest and to basically spiritual path, and along his way he runs into all kinds of different material roadblocks, so-called, people trying to convince him otherwise, even religious figures who try to persuade him of, to get off this path. And one of these places is a village where people cannot leave because they get caught up in the sense enjoyment, and they don't know how to, they get stuck in this town of sense enjoyment. While one enjoys sense gratification, it may be that there is some feeling of happiness, but actuality, that so-called feeling of happiness is the ultimate enemy of the sense enjoyer. The temporary feeling of happiness, right? And text 40. Indriyani manobudir ashyad hishtatanam uchate eter vimo ha yati yasha gyanam avritya dehinam. Indriyani, the senses, manaha, the mind, buddhi, the intelligence, asya, of the lust, adhishtanam, sitting place, uchate, called, etahi, by all these, vimo hayati, bewilders, esha, of this, ganam, knowledge, avrita, covering, dehinam, the embodied. Translation, text 40. The senses, the mind, and the intelligence are the sitting places of this lust, which veils the real knowledge of the living entity and bewilders him. So we have to purify our mind and our senses and our intelligence by the practice of Krishna consciousness, or the chanting of Krishna's names, which cleanses the heart of all the dust, and cleanses our mind and our intelligence and puts everything in the proper position, right? To be able to use our mind and our senses for the purpose of Krishna consciousness. So, and purport. The enemy has captured different strategic positions in the body of the conditioned soul, and therefore Lord Krishna is giving hints at those places, so that one who wants to conquer the enemy may know where he can be found. Mind is the center of all the activities of the senses, and thus the mind is the reservoir of all ideas of sense gratification, and as a result, the mind and the senses become the repositories of lust. Next, the intelligence department becomes the capital of such lustful propensities. Intelligence is the immediate next-door neighbor of the spirit soul. Lusty intelligence influences the spirit soul to acquire the false ego and identify itself with matter, and thus the mind and the senses, and thus with the mind and the senses. The spirit soul becomes addicted to enjoying the material senses and mistakes this as true happiness. This false identification of the spirit soul is very nicely explained in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Yashamatma buddhi kunape thri daituke svadihi kala tradishu bhauma idaihi yat tirta buddhi salite na karhi chij janeshva Abi Ganeshu Sa Eva Gokara. Probably slaughtered that, but okay. A human being who identifies this body made of three elements with his self, who considers the byproduct of the body to be his kinship, who considers the land of birth as worshipable, and who goes to the place of pilgrimage simply to take a bath rather than to meet man of transcendental knowledge there is to be considered as an ass or a cow. So this is all pretty self-explanatory. Wonderful purport. Text 41. Tashmat tavam indriyani adao niyama yamya baratar sharva papmanam prajahi hiyanamo gana vigana nashanam. Tashmat, therefore, tvam, you, indriyani, senses, adao, in the beginning, niyamya, by regulating, bharata shaba, O chief among the descendants of Bharat, papmanam, the great symbol of sin, prajahi, curb, he, certainly, enam, this, gananam, gana, knowledge, vigana, scientific knowledge of the pure soul, nashanam, destroyer. Translation. Therefore, O Arjuna, best of the Bharats, in the beginning, very beginning, curb this great symbol of sin, lust, by regulating the senses and slay the destroyer of knowledge and self-realization. Great verse. Purport. The Lord advised Arjuna to regulate the senses from the very beginning so that he could curb the greatest sinful enemy, lust, which destroys the urge for self-realization, and specifically knowledge of the self. So this great enemy is wreaking havoc on the material world, and we are caught up in it, in this illusion, thinking that we are doing these things, we are enjoying these things, this is who we are, this is our enjoyment, we're going to find happiness from this. But if we could look around, we can actually see not great any kind of fulfillment, but a lot of massive suffering and unhappiness. And we're just caught up in this perpetually. But this what we don't realize is we think, well, no, that's me, this is my enjoyment. But actually we're looking in the wrong place. We're this whole great lust to desire to control is clouding our realization of who we really are and what the purpose of our life is, and our eternal relationship with Krishna and our happiness ultimately. Viganam refers to a specific knowledge of the spirit, soul, and knowledge of one's constitutional position. Sorry, I jumped ahead there. Gananam refers to knowledge of the self as distinguished from non-self, or in other words, knowledge that the spirit soul is not the body. So that's the key first element we learn is, who are you? We learn that we are not actually, we learn our position, our essence as not the body, not the mind, not the senses, but actually the spiritual entity within the body. It's a Ham Brahmasmi. I am spirit soul. I am not this body. So this is Gananam. This is the first understanding. Viganam refers to specific knowledge of spirit soul and knowledge of one's constitutional position and his relationship to the Supreme Soul, as not being the Supreme Soul, but being the servant of the Supreme Soul, in that we actually have a purpose of engaging in loving, eternal loving service to Krishna. It is explained thus in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Gananam Param Gunam Guyam Me Yad Viganam Shamanvitam Sarashyam Tad Angam Cha Grihana Gaditam Maya. The knowledge of the self and the Supreme Self is very confidential and mysterious, being veiled by Maya, but such knowledge and specific realization can be understood if it is explained by the Lord himself, and through also the agency of the pure devotee of Krishna, who is the external manifestation of Krishna. So in this case, Arjuna is being instructed by the Supreme Lord. There were many other cases in the Srimad Bhagavatam where people were instructed by incarnations of Krishna. And of course, Lord Chaitanya instructed all of his disciples and in this process. Bhagavad Gita gives us that knowledge, specifically the knowledge of the self. The living entities are parts and parcels of the Lord, and therefore they are simply meant to serve the Lord. This consciousness is called Krishna consciousness. So from the very beginning of life, one has to learn this Krishna consciousness, and thereby one becomes fully Krishna conscious and acts accordingly. So we had read previously about this idea of sex life and what sex life was really originally for. In the Vedic system, sex life was to, with the understanding that we were spirit souls in this body. If we decided to marry, we would have children and bring the spirit souls, and there was an actual process by which you could bring in, attract spirit souls in the mode of goodness. You raise your child to be Krishna conscious, and therefore that is the purpose of having children. That is the purpose of sex life. Lust is only the perverted reflection of love of God, which is natural for every living entity. But if one is educated in Krishna consciousness from the very beginning, that natural love of God cannot deteriorate into lust. When love of God deteriorates into lust, it is very difficult to return to the normal condition. Nonetheless, Krishna consciousness is so powerful that even a late beginner can become a lover of God by following the regulative principles of devotional service. So from any stage of life or from the time of understanding its urgency, one can begin regulating the senses in Krishna consciousness, devotional service of the Lord, and turn the lust into love of Godhead, the highest perfectional stage of human life. Wonderful, another wonderful purport. So that also indicates that it's ideally, if you're practicing sadhana bhakti and you are married, then you would raise your children from an early age so that they can have incredible, lots of exposure to this chanting and the process. But that it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to become pure devotees because you're a devotee of Krishna. Everybody has a free choice in this matter. But it also makes the point that, people might say, well, my body's already old or whatever. I can't chant Krishna's names because I don't have the chance of developing love for Krishna. But that has been refuted by the great saints, my spiritual master, Bhaktivedanta, all great saints, as being not true. That you can actually just come and chant Krishna's names and you can attain love for Godhead by your actions. Text 42. Indriyani paranani ahur, indre baya param manaha, manashastu para buddhir, yo buddhye paratashtu saha. Indriyani, senses, parani, superior, ahu is said, indre biya, more than the senses, param, superior, mana, the mind, manasha, more than the mind, tu, also, para, superior, buddhi, intelligence, ya, one which, buddhe, more than the intelligence, parataha, superior, tu, but, saha, he. Translation, text 42. The working senses are superior to dual matter. Mind is higher than the senses. Intelligence is still higher than the mind, and he, the soul, is even higher than the intelligence. So when we read in the Bhagavad Gita, earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, false ego, these are all, more and more subtle matter. And so here it is the matter is the lowest of, it actually has no consciousness whatsoever, the matter itself. Then we have the working senses, which are higher and superior than matter itself, and that mind is higher than the senses and intelligence is higher than the mind, and that the living entity is the highest apex of the within all these different energies. The senses are different outlets for the activities of lust. As we said, lust is a sitting place in all kinds of different parts of our material body. So there are different ways we can engage in lust. We can engage in lust through the mind. We can engage actively through the senses. We can engage, in our intelligence by trying to, use our intelligence in a way to try to enjoy, figure out how we can enjoy these things. Lust is reserved within the body, but it is given a vent through the senses. Therefore, the senses are superior to the body as a whole. These outlets are not in use when there is a superior consciousness or Krishna consciousness. In Krishna consciousness, the soul makes direct connection with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, the bodily functions, as described here, ultimately end in the Supreme Soul. Bodily action means the functions of the senses, and stopping the senses means stopping all bodily actions. But since the mind is active, then, even though the body may be silent at rest, the mind will act, as it does during dreaming. But above the mind there is a determination of the intelligence, and above the intelligence is the soul proper. If therefore the soul is directly engaged with the Supreme, naturally all other subordinates, namely the intelligence, mind, and the senses, will be automatically engaged. In the Katha Upanishad, and this is stated by the analogy of the chariot and all these things are different aspects of the chariot, in that the living entity is driving this chariot. And if it is driving it well, and the horses and everything is under control, then it's a smooth ride. But if it's not, then it's not. But above the mind, there is the determination of the intelligence, and above the intelligence is the soul proper. If therefore the soul is directly engaged with the Supreme, naturally all other subordinates, namely the intelligence, mind, and senses, will be automatically engaged. In the Katha Upanishad, there is a passage in which it is said that the objects of sense gratifications are superior to the senses, and the mind is superior to the sense objects. If therefore the mind is directly engaged in the service of the Lord constantly, then there is no chance of the senses becoming engaged in other ways. This mental attitude has already been explained. If the mind is engaged in the transcendental service of the Lord, there is no chance of its being engaged in its lower propensities. The higher taste that we've been talking about, right? So it's not very attractive to go for this lower propensities of sense enjoyment when we have a higher taste. In the Katha Upanishad, the soul has been described as Mahan, the great. Therefore, the soul is above all, namely the sense objects, the senses, the mind, and the intelligence. Therefore, directly understanding the constitutional position of the soul is the solution of the whole problem. With intelligence, one has to seek out the With intelligence, one has to seek out the constitutional position of the soul, and then engage the mind always in Krishna consciousness. That solves the whole problem. A neophyte spiritualist is generally advised to keep aloof from the objects of senses. One has to strengthen the mind by use of intelligence. If by intelligence one engages one's mind in Krishna consciousness, by complete surrender into the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then automatically the mind becomes stronger. And even though the senses are very strong, like serpents, they will be more effective than serpents with broken fangs. That's a great analogy. So if it's kind of like mind over matter, right? In the mind over gross matter, at least. If you have things in a line, and the mind becomes stronger when it's focused on a higher taste, it will be less inclined to try to go for the lower taste. And then when those things come through the mind, and you'll be like, no thank you, no thank you. You can be able to, you know how to stay away from that. But even though the soul is the master of the intelligence and the mind, and the senses also, still, unless it is strengthened by association with Krishna and Krishna consciousness, there is every chance of falling down due to the agitated mind. So it's not just the mind strengthening itself, it's the mind being active in Krishna consciousness, the living entity being active in doing service in Krishna consciousness. So it is Krishna that makes your mind strong and being able to control the senses that are agitated. Text 43. Evam buddhe param buddva shamshtabyat manam atmana jahi shatrum mahabahu kama rupam durashadam. Evam, thus, buddhi of intelligence, param superior, buddva so knowing, samstabya by steadying, atmanam the mind, atmana by deliberate intelligence, jahi conquer, shatrum the enemy, mahabaho O mighty armed one, kama rupam this the form of lust, durashadam formidable. Translation, text 43. Thus, knowing oneself to be transcendental to material senses, mind, and intelligence, one should control the lower self by the higher self, and thus, by spiritual strength, conquer this insatiable enemy known as lust. So here Krishna is explaining this in an analogy of like a battle of this great enemy of lust that can be controlled by focusing your life, your mind, everything on Krishna, and being able to be aware of your spiritual identity, and keep that from sliding down into material consciousness. Purport. This third chapter of Bhagavad Gita is conclusively directed to Krishna consciousness by knowing oneself as the eternal servitor of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, without considering impersonal voidness as the ultimate end. In the material existence of life, one is certainly influenced by propensities for lust and desire for dominating the resources of material nature. Desire for overlording and sense gratification are the greatest enemies of the conditioned soul, but by the strength of Krishna consciousness, one can control the material senses, the mind, and the intelligence. One may not give up work and prescribed duties all of a sudden, but by gradually developing Krishna consciousness, one can be situated in the transcendental position without being influenced by the material senses and the mind, by steady intelligence directed towards one's pure identity. This is the sum total of this chapter. In the immature stage of material existence, philosophical speculations and artificial attempts to control the senses by the so-called practice of yogic postures can never help a man towards spiritual life. He must be trained in Krishna consciousness by a higher intelligence. Thus ends the Bhaktivedanta purports to the third chapter of the Srimad Bhagavad Gita in the matter of karma yoga, or the discharge of one's prescribed duty in Krishna consciousness. So really wonderful. That was an awesome chapter that it pretty much is self-explanatory. We Krishna, Krishna, Krishna all the way. We come into the practice of sadhana bhakti with so much baggage, so many things that we carry around with them, and we're very aware of that. And the more we chant, the more actually we see that in our life. The things the other things will drop away if we keep our focus on the prize, which is Krishna. Krishna is the source and the end, the goal in the end. And the end is the continual relationship with Krishna. So this is very, very wonderful. So next time we will be getting into chapter 4, which is entitled Transcendental Knowledge, and Krishna will further explain the science of Bhakti Yoga to his disciple and friend Arjuna. So thank you very much. We'll see you next time. Namaste.